some just good ways to get a return on your failure. So let's get going. Number one, if you want to return on your failure, you've got to keep failure and success together. Let me explain. There's a tendency for us to separate failure and success. We say, okay, succeed. Hey, don't fail. You know, do it right. Don't mess up. And we take success and failure and we put them just wide apart, and we just basically succeed, don't fail. Succeed, don't fail. And success and failure were never meant to be separated. Success and failure are supposed to be side by side. They complement one another. Success needs failure, failure needs success, and if you separate them, they never either one reach their potential. Let me explain. For 40 years, I have had what I call learning lunches. This is just really simple. People are always asking me, John, gosh, how do you grow? Well, one of the ways I grow intentionally is literally, I have learning lunches every month. And I've done it for 40 years. And a learning lunch is very simple. I take somebody to lunch. I buy it. And the only qualification of the person I take to lunch is, they're bigger than me, better than me, smarter than me, more experienced than me, more successful than me, have more money than me, whatever. In other words, they're beyond me. So I take them to lunch, and I don't even eat. I have 7 questions, and I want to ask them these questions. So I've asked these questions hundreds and hundreds of times, and one of the questions I ask is, what's the most important lesson you ever learned in your life, and why was it important to you? Well, they start sharing with me what their most important lesson was. Now, I've asked this question to hundreds of people over 40 years. And every time I ask them, what's the most important lesson you ever learned? In that lesson, as they're talking to me about what they learned, they include failure every time. I have never heard a person when they said, well, the most important lesson I ever learned, and all they talked about was wins and victories and successes. Every time they talk to me about it, they say, "Oh my goodness, no! Let me tell you." I lost my job and I had to go another direction, or I had a friend of mine that had a serious illness, or my marriage was on the. I mean, they're always talking about some loss, some miss, some failure, and I thought, when I ask a person what's the most important lesson they ever learned, they don't take failure and success and separate them, and they say, well, let me tell you about my success. And they keep them together. And the reason they keep them together is that's where they're supposed to be. You got to keep them together. If you want to return on failure, you got to keep success close to it. Let me explain. Let's say I'm on a roll and I'm really succeeding. I'm doing really, really well. Okay, I'm hitting the ball. I need to keep failure close to these successes to keep me humble. Humility is such an important quality in a leader's life. And if I remove my failure and all I do is think about my wins, I'm going to get arrogant. And very quickly, you see the value of humility is it makes me teachable. You show me a humble person, and I'll show you a person that sits at the feet and asks questions and say, teach me something. Humility is essential to be teachable, and teachability is essential to grow. You can't grow without being. It's impossible to personally grow without being a teachable person. So I need to keep my failures close to my successes so that when I'm on a roll, I still have a sense of humility in my life. And by the way, when I'm over there and I'm not on a roll, I'm kind of losing and I'm missing and I'm having some failures in my life. I need to keep success real close to those failures. Because when I'm failing, if I keep success close to them, it gives me resiliency. Resiliency is a result of success staying close to failure, and humility is a result of failure staying close to success. Wow. Bill Gates is exactly right when he said, success is a lousy teacher. He's right. It's a lousy teacher. He said, it makes people think they can't lose. Well, why do they think that? Because they separated success from failure, and they don't live a real life, and they don't have honesty. And because of that, they don't get a return on their failure. I was just last week, Eric, I was speaking for a large leadership conference, and we were in Q&A, and I had a person ask me, they said, what is, this was just last week, so it was in March. They said, John, what was your biggest failure this month? Well, if it's a month, I've had several failures. I know that for sure. But I got a little frustrated myself because when they asked the question, I couldn't really pull one out really quickly. You'd think, well, let me tell you my biggest failure in the last 4 weeks. And you would think you could pull it out quickly, but I couldn't pull it out quickly. And it kind of bothered me for a moment because I thought, John, you've had several failures. Why can't you pick one out? And then it hit me. If they would have asked the question, John, in this last month, what was your greatest success? I'd have had a hard time picking that out either. Because you see, I keep success and failure together. And when you keep them together, you just expect that, every day I win some, I lose some. It's okay. It's okay. And they each balance each other out. And failure isn't near as depressing when I keep it with success. And, success isn't so amazing when I keep it close to failure. So I think that to get a return on failure, the first thing I would say without any question is just keep them close together. Don't separate them. It's just part of life and who we are. And if you really understand success and failure and you appreciate both, you'll start to get a bigger return out of it, I promise. So let's go to number 2. There's another way to get a good return on failure. The second way to do that is to understand the difference between good misses and bad misses. Yeah, you heard correctly. If you want to return on failure, you've got to be able to say, oh, that was a good miss, or uh-oh, now that's a bad miss. This is very important because what we do to reach the dreams that we have is a lot of times we don't get hits all the time and we don't succeed every time. Sometimes we just fall short. But when I fall short, I have to ask myself, now, was that a good miss or was that a bad miss? When I wrote the book Failing Forward, I didn't do this intentionally. I did it intuitively. But when I talked about failing forward, guess what? Failing forward is a good miss. I failed, but I went forward. By the way, if you want the antithesis of that, failing backwards, that's a bad miss. So what you got to do is you got to look at your misses and you got to ask yourself, okay, was that a good miss or was that a bad miss? And let me see if I can pull that out for a moment. Now, I'm just developing this material, so it's not great yet. I'm sorry, but it's fresh, but it's not great. So on this section, I've got some work yet to do, just a lot of mental work and some questions I've got to ask, but that's another story. So let me try to help kind of define the difference between a good miss and a bad miss. I've already kind of referred to it for a moment, and in fact, a good miss kind of moves us forward, and a bad miss, kind of takes us backward. But let me just say this here: if you have a good miss, let me tell you something. It's a good miss when you missed, but you made adjustments. In other words, you thought, okay, that wasn't what I thought it was going to be, and that didn't quite work out like I thought it was going to work out. For me to admit, I gotta make some adjustments now. I was playing golf with Tom Watson, he's got to be one of the 10 best golfers ever. He's won over 50 tournaments on the PGA. And so we just finished playing a round of golf. And by the way, on the 10th hole on that round, I got a birdie and he got a par. And as we walked off, he put his arm around me and he said, "John, you beat me on that hole." And I did. I got a birdie, he got a par. And yeah, that's the only hole I beat him. And, that's the difference between a pro and an amateur. He's good on every hole, and every once in a while I'm good, but not on every hole. So we're having a good dinner, and he told me, he said, "John, when I went into a tournament, a professional tournament," he said, "I won over 50 tournaments. There were only 5 tournaments that when I went into them on the first day, Thursday, when I teed it up on the first tee, I could basically look at all the players and pretty much say, I think I'll win." He said, "My swing was just so good that I just played for 4 days and I was in rhythm and I won the tournament." He said 5 times. He said, the other 50 times, I had to make adjustments. I'd be on the second day and all of a sudden my irons weren't working right. And I just knew that my swing was getting a little bit out of rhythm. And he said, when I finished the round, I was back over there on the driving range and I'm working and adjusting, fixing, tweaking my swing. And he said, 50 of my wins, I adjusted my way to victory. And when he told me that story, I thought, now, that's a good miss. That's a good miss. He adjusted his way. You see, so, wow, I love this. A good miss is when you make adjustments. Can I tell you what a bad miss is? A bad miss is when you make excuses. There's no such thing as making excuses and having a good miss. It's easier to go from failure to success than it is from excuses to success. And so, in fact, let me just say this. The worst excuse that you'll ever have is your best excuse. Because when we have a real good excuse, we buy it ourselves. We think, well, that's a good reason for me not being able to do what I did. And so we buy into that excuse. And when I buy into that excuse, I no longer have the chance of arriving where I want to arrive, because excuses are exits. And if I'm on the freeway of life, every time I take an excuse, I just got off the freeway of life. And so when we have a real good excuse, it's a real bad excuse because we believe it. So a bad miss is when I make excuses, and a good miss is when I make adjustments. I'm going to read something to you. It's going to take me 2 minutes, but it's just powerful. And it will explain a good miss and a bad miss better than I can ever explain it. And it's Portia Nelson's autobiography in 5 short chapters. Maybe you've read this. I think it's classic, and I think Portia Nelson knew the difference between a good miss and a bad miss. And so hang with me for 2 minutes, and I'm going to read it to you. And after each little chapter, I'm going to ask you, was that a good miss or was that a bad miss? Here we go. Chapter 1, I walk down the street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I'm lost. I'm helpless. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. Now, wow, was that a good miss or was that a bad miss? By the way, when you have the miss initially, in the beginning, you don't know whether it was a good miss or a bad miss. So at chapter 1, when she falls in, it takes a long time to get out. We don't know if it's a good miss or a bad miss, because a good miss or a bad miss isn't what we did. A good miss or a bad miss is based upon the response of what we did. So here we go. Chapter 2. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I don't see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. Was that a good miss or a bad miss? Chapter 3. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I see it there. I still fall in. It's become a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. Oh, well, was that a good miss or was that a bad miss? Chapter 4. I walk down the same street. There's a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. Oh. Good miss or bad miss? I'm about to read chapter 5, but I can tell you, they're all bad misses. Chapter 5. I walk down another street. Good miss. She changed. She adjusted. That's a good miss. Let's go to number 3. How do you and I get a return on failure? Number 3 is embrace hard. Embrace it. Not just accept it. Not just say it's there. Embrace hard. There's a book I would suggest that you read if you haven't. It's a classic. It's an older book. I read it many, many years ago. It's written by a psychiatrist, Scott Peck. It's called The Road Less Traveled. Now, this is a book that made a profound effect upon my life. If you're going to go into my home office in the section where I have books that changed my life, you would see The Road Less Traveled. Now, what does this incredible man talk about when he gives us this subject, The Road Less Traveled? What I love about the book is when you go to the first paragraph, the first 3 words are the essence of what the book really is. The first 3 words of the book is, life is difficult. Life is difficult. And then he says, and I love this, this is one of the greatest truths that we can ever accept in our life, that life is difficult. But the moment that we accept the truth that life is not easy, that it is very difficult, he said, the moment we accept the truth that life is difficult, it no longer becomes difficult because we embrace the fact that there's nothing quick, there's no sudden success. Or as I teach all the time, here we go, everything worthwhile, it's uphill. It's uphill. Every dream you have, it's uphill. If you ever build a great business, it's uphill. It's uphill. If you have a great relationship, it's uphill. It's all uphill. Everything worthwhile is uphill. You've never heard anybody or read a book on accidental accomplishments. You've never heard anybody talk about how they coasted to success. It's all uphill. And hey, it's in the last couple of years, the hills, it's even higher. But everything worthwhile is uphill. This is embracing hard. This is what Scott Peck is saying, that the moment that I accept the fact and embrace the truth that life is difficult, it no longer becomes difficult because now I'm ready for it. I'm ready for it. I was doing a leadership conference a few years ago. A couple thousand people there. It was just magic. I'm teaching these leadership principles, and they're clapping, cheering, taking notes. It's just fun. People are leaning in. They're learning. So I'm signing books in the last session, one more session, and then we're done for the day. Here comes just a wonderful kid. He stands in front of me, and I'm signing his book, and he says, "Oh, I'm loving this leadership conference." And he said, "I made the decision today." I said, "Well, what's your decision?" He said, I want to do what you do. I said, "That's great. I like that." Finished signing his book, handed it back to him. I said, could I ask you a question? Oh, yes, yes. I understand you want to do what I do. Oh, my gosh, yes, I want to do what you do. I said, would you like to do what I did so you can do what I do? It's the did that's the problem. Of course we want to do what they do. But before they get to do it, they had to did it. And if you don't did it, you don't get to do it. We didn't all get good by accident or quickly. We put in our time, paid the price, made a lot of mistakes, had to make a bunch of U-turns. We had to did before we got to do. Wow. Don't miss this. And by the way, people want to skip the did and they want to go right straight to the do. But you can't do that. You got to do the did first. You got to do the did, then you get to do the do. When people say, well, how do you develop leaders? It's very simple. You got to practice leadership. Everything that you do well, you had to practice it. I communicate very well, but why shouldn't I? I've done this 13,000 times. Hello? So people see me now and they say, oh, you're an amazing communicator. Well, I think so, probably, but hey, I had to do the did. I got 13,000 dids in my life. 13,000 dids, and now I get to do. But if I don't do the dids, I can't do the dids. In fact, let me tell you something. If you don't do the dids, you're in deep do. You are. And I run into people all the time. And they want to do the do, but they don't want to do the did. They have never embraced hard. And because they haven't embraced hard, honestly, they'll never get to where they really want to go because it's uphill all the way. But the moment that you embrace it, as Scott Peck says, now, when you're climbing, it's not odd, doesn't feel wrong. You're on the road to success. Okay. I've given you 3 things to get a return on failure. Keep failure and success together. Understand the difference between a good miss and a bad miss. Embrace hard. Number 4, anticipate failure. Now, I know that this sounds so negative. You think, oh my gosh, John, what do you mean anticipate failure? That's kind of a gloomy outlook. And so let me help you with this. See, anticipation influences preparation. So if I anticipate failure, I'm going to build my life in such a way that I'm going to be ready for it when it happens, and I'm going to be able to work through it even quicker because I wasn't blindsided, I wasn't surprised. So yes, anticipate failure. Every time I start something new, I anticipate that there will be some misses, some losses, some mistakes, some failures. The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, which they tell me is the best-selling leadership book ever written. I wrote it 25 years ago. Eric, can you imagine? 25 years ago that book came out. In fact, in the last few months, I've been doing a revision of it, a 25th anniversary revision, and this coming June, the revision will be there. I think I revised about 30, 35% of the book. Really enjoyed it. I didn't revise the laws. They stayed the same, but I touched it up here and there. So when the 21 Laws of Leadership, when that book was launched, we did a book tour, a 7-day book tour in a jet. And we did 3 cities every day and started on the East Coast and literally went all the way across, finished in San Diego, 21 cities in 7 days on the 21 laws. By the time we were in San Diego, the book was already on the bestseller list and for years has stayed high on in fact, it sells more books today than ever before. We were coming back into Atlanta, into PDK, and we were about 50 feet from the runway, and we hit a wind shear and the plane just dropped straight down and hit the runway. But when it hit the runway, instead of hitting it straight, it hit it sideways, which I immediately thought to myself, we're going to flip. I mean, we didn't land well, we didn't hit well. But instead of disaster, as soon as those wheels hit that runway a little sideways, that pilot nosed that plane right up in the air. Whew, close call. We circled a couple times, and we land well, and I get off the plane, and I kiss the ground, and then the pilot, when he gets off the plane, I kiss him, and oh my gosh, thank you. And then I looked at him and I said, what amazes me is how quickly you made that decision to get that plane back up in the air. And he looked at me and he said, oh, that wasn't a quick decision at all. I said, what do you mean? He said, I made that decision 20 years ago. When I became a pilot, I asked myself, what can go wrong when I fly a plane? One of the things I determined could go wrong is I landed wrongly. And I made a decision 20 years ago that if I don't land well, then I'll get the plane back up in the air as quickly as I can, because there's more give and take in the air than there is on the ground. And boy, he's right on that. And I walked away that day and I thought, oh, this is huge. You see, he anticipated failure. So when it came, he just knew how to deal with it. Now, when you take on a big project, this is for another day, so I don't have time to tell the story, but in our nonprofit world, we teach values in small groups in countries, invited in by the presidents of the countries to bring transformation. We believe that values taught in small groups, when a person learns good values and they live good values, they just become more valuable. They become more valuable to themselves, their family, their community, etc. And so my goal is to have 10% of a country's population in these small groups. That's what Malcolm Gladwell calls the tipping point. So that I can help a culture just begin to embrace good values. And it's a high ambition and it's a big goal, and I'm way over my head. And so people will say, well, do you think that you think you'll achieve that? I said, well, I don't know. I really don't know. But I did some mental preparation, just like that pilot. I said, okay, this is not going to be easy. There are going to be a lot of challenges, a lot of problems. And so I did mental preparation, and I want to give this to you because this will help you. So if you're trying to accomplish something really big, and by the way, that doesn't bother me at all. In fact, it doesn't. I would rather go for something big and not quite get there and help a lot of people than do something small, get there and help a few people. Okay. So I made 3 mental decisions in going into this project bigger than me. And the first one was, I will keep moving. And what I mean by that is when we get in the midst of difficulty, failure, adversity, obstacles, the tendency for us is to do what we did to COVID. Just stop, just freeze. Oh my gosh, I'm not going to do anything until I can figure this out. And what I know is that the moment I say that to myself, I've lost all potential of winning, because you only can win with action. So as I anticipate failure and not always winning, I say to myself, I will keep moving. And why will I keep moving? Because what I shared with you earlier, this whole action attraction. And if I keep moving, I'll find an answer, because there's always an answer. So I will keep moving is mental commitment number 1. Second mental commitment is I will keep adjusting, because I not only believe that there's always an answer, I believe that there is always more than one answer. In fact, everything I do today, I honestly believe there's probably a better way to do it. So I'm always open to saying, okay, how can I improve myself? How can I get better? So I will keep moving. I will keep adjusting. And thirdly, I will keep believing. I will keep believing. I understand that you may not believe in me, but I want you to know that I believe in me. And I will keep believing, because I just absolutely believe that the mission, the cause, is worth the effort. It's mountain climbing. It's hard and it's going along. But because I anticipate failure, I do this mental conditioning in my life that I'll keep moving, I'll keep adjusting, and I'll keep believing. Now, let me take you to number 5. If you want to return on your failure, you need to develop a process. You need to develop a process to receive a return on failure. There's literally a way that you can just get a higher return on failure. And it's a process. I'm going to give you what I call our success cycle. It's not a success journey. If you're taking a success journey, you pass something and may never come back to it. A success cycle is, honestly, you just keep doing the same thing. And you keep doing the same things, but you get different outcomes. I'll explain that in a moment. And there are 5 parts of this success cycle. And the reason I'm teaching this is because I have a coaching company we started a little bit over 10 years ago. We have now 44,000 coaches in 172 countries of the world. We have the largest coaching company in America, in the world. And people come to me and they say, well, John, how did you gather these coaches and how have you done this? Well, it's very simple. It's very simple. We have a cycle to success, and let me give it to you, because once you work this cycle in your business, in your life, you'll begin to get a higher return on failure. Here's where we go. Number 1 is testing. We're always testing. We're just going into virgin territory, unproven ground, and we're saying, will this work? And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. But we're always testing. We test a lot. Now, if you test a lot, the second part of the cycle is you're going to fail a lot. And your failure rate will be based upon your testing rate. If you test 100 times, I don't know, maybe you'll have 60 failures. If you test 10 times, you'll have 6 failures. So if you want to reduce your failure rate, you got to reduce your testing rate. And that's the way most people think, because there's scarcity. But if you'll understand the cycle, you'll understand why I keep increasing the testing rate. So we test, we fail, and then we learn. The fruit of failure is learning. So when people, they talk about, oh my gosh, let me tell you about my failure, why I listen to their failure, but I can hardly wait for them to be finished because I want to ask them a question. As soon as they're done, okay, you've told me about your failure. I just have one question. The question is, what did you learn? What did you learn? You see, the fruit of failure is that you're learning something. Just as the fruit of testing is that you fail. You say, well, that's bad fruit. No. It's a good miss if I learn from it. It's a bad miss if I excuse the failure or if I leave the failure and abandon it. So I test, fail, learn. The 4th part of this success cycle is I improve. And the value of learning isn't what you know. The value of learning is what you do. Improvement is the reason that you learn. I'm not, of course, I want to know more, but it's not knowledge that's going to make me a better person, more successful. It's when I learn something, what do I change in my behavior? What do I improve in my life that's just going to make me a better person? So I test, fail, learn, we improve, and then we re-enter. And we don't re-enter until we've improved. In fact, if you just watch me for a moment, I'll show you how this cycle works visually. Test, fail, learn, improve. Now watch this. Re-enter. Test, fail, learn, improve. Re-enter. Test, fail, learn, improve. Re-enter. Test, fail, learn, improve. Re-enter. You can see what happens. When you do the cycle, if you truly improve and then re-enter, every time you get back to the cycle, and by the way, as soon as we re-enter, we go back to testing again. That never stops. But we keep getting better. We keep going higher. This is and this is the cycle of success. And once you have this process, then you're going to have a great return on your failure, because we are failing on purpose. We are testing, knowing that we'll fail, knowing that we will learn, knowing that we will improve, and then knowing that we will re-enter at a different level. That's a huge high return. The process allows you to get a high return on failure. So number 6, if I want to return on my failure, I need to encourage others with my failures. Okay, let's talk for a moment. When I was a young leader, and Eric, he spoke about my faith. For 25 years, I was a pastor, okay? And I was a good one. In fact, when I was 28, I had the 10th largest church in America. And in fact, as far as I know, I'm the first person to ever put on a church growth conference. I brought hundreds of pastors together. In fact, my first conference, I think we had about 1,000 pastors. And I said, I'm going to teach you what I know about how to grow a church. And so we had this conference, and it was 2 days, and I had 4 speakers, each speaker having a half day each. So on day 1, I had 2 speakers. Day 2, I was the last speaker the last day. Well, the first speaker got up the first day, and he just talked about, and he was very good, and he talked about all of his successes, and man, we were just clapping and cheering, and it was kind of great. Wow, he's really, really good. And so that afternoon, the speaker got up, and all he talked about was his successes. And I thought, I was hoping maybe we could do a little bit better than having just success, 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 success. It's such a lousy teacher. That's what Bill Gates says. But the day was over, and people seemed to be satisfied. The next morning, now I was a young leader. I mean, what was I, 28? If I would have known better today, I'd have grabbed the speaker the next day and said, let me tell you what you can't talk about. You can't talk about success. We're starting to gag on it now. The next morning, the speaker got up, and he did success all day. And now I'm pissed. I'm just, oh my gosh, I'm worn out with success. So I excused myself. I went into my office, and I got my legal pad, my 4-color pen out, and I rewrote my lesson. And I said, and I walked out that last session on that day, and I said, we've had enough success. I'm gagging on it myself. And let me just say this. Anybody that ever talks about success, they have to be real. They have to be authentic. You got to talk about your misses, your failures. So I said, since you heard success from the 3 of them, I'm just going to tell you about all my failures, because I've got a bunch of them. And boy, I did a lesson called Flops, Failures, and Fumbles. And I'm telling you, I began to talk to them about all my misses and all my losses. And they're going into hysterics. They're listening to me. They're cracking up. And I just tell them, and I did this, and that was right. And they're clapping, they're cheering. And by the time it was all over, standing ovation. And I looked at them and I thought, what happened? And what happened is I realized then that if you want to impress people, talk about your success. But if you want to impact people, talk about your failures. And they identified with me, because what happens, you got to ask yourself a question. Do I want fans or friends? If you want fans, then make the gap as big as you can. And you're up here and you're amazing. And people down there, they're not so amazing, but they sure love you. And so you got fans. I don't want fans. I want friends. I want to close the gap. And the way that you close the gap is talk about your losses. I'm going to tell you right now, I think a big miss in direct marketing is you talk about wins and you don't realistically talk about losses. Honestly, if I was in some of your companies, I'd quit real quick. I mean, when I hear everybody talk about how successful they are and all the trips they're taking and the houses they have and the boats they got and all this other stuff, when I go out and I try to recruit somebody, or I go out and share the plan and I don't do well, I mean, all I've heard you talk about success, I have no one to relate to. All I can say is, they're really good and I'm really bad. And this isn't for me. And the next thing, I'm gone. I'm gone. And by the way, when people leave you, they're not going to raise their head and say, I want you to know I'm leaving you. They just slip away. And after a few meetings, you say, wonder where John is. Well, John slipped away. Why did he slip away? Because you weren't realistic about your business. Honestly, you just talked about your wins. And if you talk about your wins and everybody on the team talks about their wins, here I am, and I had a loss, and I look at you know what the first thing I feel? I feel like I don't fit. When I heard Eric talk, and he said, make the net as wide as you can make it. Well, let me tell you something. If you just talk about success and you make that net really, really small. I had a person recently, Eric, they came up to me and they said, man, this was huge what you taught me today. And then they said, I wish you could have heard me. They said, they talked to me. They said, John, I wish I could have heard you 20 years ago. And I looked at him and I said, no, you don't. And they said, what do you mean? I said, you wouldn't have wanted to hear me 20 years ago. And they said, oh, no. I would have loved to heard you 20 years ago. And I said, you're going to have to trust me, friend. My name's John. You didn't want to hear me 20 years ago. And I can see they're taken back. And they're saying, what do you mean? And then they said, if I would have heard 20 years ago the things I heard from you today, it would have changed my life. And I look at them and said, if you had heard me 20 years ago, you wouldn't have heard what you heard from me today. Do you think I was born with this stuff? Do you think I came out of my mother's womb holding up the 21 irrefutable laws of leadership? You gotta be kidding me. If I had one wish, I mean, if you truly got a genie, come out and say, you've got one wish. If I had one wish, I'll tell you what it would be. More than anything else. I'm 75 now. I'm at the top of my game, and people think I'm better than I am. They think I'm bigger than I am. And I just look at them and I say, honestly, let me just say something about success. People will put you on a pedestal, and they'll think you're better than you are. And you're not that good, but they'll stick you on a pedestal. It's okay if people, when you're successful, I don't think you can keep or stop people from putting you on a pedestal. But let me say something to you. My name is John, and I am your friend. If people put you on the pedestal in the daytime, when you get home, you better take yourself off that pedestal. You ain't that hot. You're not that good. I'm not that good. If I had a genie wish, I would like for you to have seen me 50 years ago when I was 25. Trust me. I wasn't very good. I'm not being humble. I wasn't very good. I was a good communicator, but I wasn't close to being a great communicator. My first book was terrible. Oh my gosh, it was awful. Still in print. I keep telling the publisher, please take it, burn it, do something with it. Don't let it go out there. But it's still in print. And the other day I had a lady come up to me and wanted me to sign my first book. And she said, this is your first book and I love it. I said, you got to be kidding me. So what'd you love about it? She said, the short chapters. Yeah, it's about 100 pages. It's got 33 chapters. That's about 3 pages a chapter. And she said, how did you ever think about that? It's so, I love those short chapters. I said, lady. The only reason there's 3 pages per chapter is I didn't have anything else to say. In fact, some of the chapters are 2 pages too long. Come on. You see, I wish you could have seen me 50 years ago because I wasn't that good. You see, the way it works is this. In the beginning, when you start, you're not as bad as people think you are. But if you really do it consistently and you really do it over the years, you perfect and get better. In the end, when you're 75, you're not as good as people think you are. And I'm living the dream right now. People think I'm better than I am, and I know I'm not. But they think that because they see me now. Sure, you see me now, but you see me at the end of the journey. Consistency compounds. If you would have seen me at 25, let me say this. If you would have seen me at 25, you would be greatly encouraged. Trust me, you would be so encouraged. You would be charging hell with a water pistol. Yeah, you'd be so happy because you'd say, oh my gosh, I just heard him speak. He really wasn't that good. Yeah, you needed to see me on the front end, not the back end. So I've determined to tell people about the front end. I do. You're already seeing the back end. I just got to tell you, I wasn't that good. And the reason I want you to know that is because I committed intentionally to have a lifestyle of personally growing and develop myself on a daily basis. I achieved some pretty good stuff. But it takes time to do that. So don't be hard on yourself. Just trust me. Just trust me. It's okay. Consistency compounds, but it doesn't reward you at the end of the first week, the first month, the first year. In fact, I laugh and I tell people all the time, if you really want to quit, quit immediately. I mean, quit like the first month because you haven't done anything yet. You haven't got anything to compound yet. But just understand, if you want to return on your failure, encourage others with your failures. And I do that all the time. I look at people, they'll tell me, I kind of messed up. I said, let me tell you about a big mess up I had. I can beat that mess up. The last thing I want to say, I'm sorry, I went a little long, Eric. I'll shut up here. The last thing on getting a return on failure is just understand this. The right response to your failure will give you character. So I close with this story. I was on an executive call with a CEO that is highly successful. If I gave you his name, every one of you would know him. And we're having a good call. It's an executive circle call, so I have about 50 executives on the call with me. And for 20 minutes, he's given me best practices, and then I pull leadership off of what he said, and then I ask him a couple questions. Then I open up for everybody else to ask him questions. And this guy was so good. And he talked a lot about when he was building this company, the misses and losses. I loved his authenticity. I don't think people want a perfect leader. I think they want an authentic leader. So when he finished, I asked him, I said, okay, when you look at your losses, your misses, your failures, let's talk about a do-over. If you could go back and do one of them over, which one would you pick? And I'm waiting to say, oh my gosh, if I had do-overs, there's 100 do-overs I'd like to have. I'm kind of waiting for that response. And his response just absolutely floored me. I didn't see it coming. He said, well, John, if you could give do-overs and if I could go back and do over my failures, he said, I choose not to do any of them over. I said, you have got to be kidding me. What do you mean you choose not to do any of them over? He said, well, I would leave them as they were. And he said, don't get me wrong, I made wrong decisions. I've hired sometimes poorly. I've got a lot of misses in my life, got a lot of failures, a lot of blow-ups. I got that. But I wouldn't do any of them over. And I said, why wouldn't you do them over? And he said, because every failure I had taught me a lesson. And out of that failure, I developed character. And if I went back and did them over, I would lose the lesson and I'd lose my character. And I'm not willing to lose either. So let the failures lie. I'm a better person because of it. That man knows how to get a return out of failure.
What if we started seeing failure like we see our time and like we see our money? In other words, when we put money into, we're at the beginning of the year, when we put money into an investment, you know what we're after? A return on investment. When we spend time on something, we as leaders, we're always looking, what's the return on my time? What if we looked at failure as if it needed an ROF, a return on failure? If we realized that in every failure, there was this return that we could get. Now, John's now taught publicly in public settings 3 times this idea of a return on failure. In fact, the last time he taught it was in San Francisco, and he said, I'm going to write a book on it. So I'm not going to go deep into what John did there, but I'm going to tell you something that occurred to me when this idea of a return on failure hit me. What if we all realized that failure was a part of leadership? It's just a part, it's a part of it. It's a part of life. It's a part of leadership. It's a part of getting better. Now we go into risk. We go into audacious dreams being chased with this concept. I'm going to fail. It's going to happen. What is going to be my ROF? What is going to be my return on failure? And then I came up with this idea, and John is going to take this and make it better too, I'm quite sure. But what if we looked at failure in 4 categories? What if we looked at it first as to get a return on failure, fail first? Now, I wish I could tell my 20-year-old self, hey, Mark, be the first one to fail.
Right.
I wanted to be the first one to not fail. Everybody else around me failed.
Same.
Let me learn from them. I don't want to fail. What if we said, hey, I want to fail first because I know that failure is the way to success. So therefore, the quicker I fail at something that's bigger than me, the quicker I can accomplish something that's bigger than me. Let's fail first. What if number two, we tried to fail fast? Hey, I'm going to get this failure thing and I'm going to get to it. So many times we're in the middle of failing, and rather than admit we're failing, we try to cover it up and prolong the failure. What if we just went, boom,
Right.
I'm failing? And we fail fast, admit it fast, and can get on with the lesson rather than prolonging the
Yes.
failure and living in the failure. Just fail fast.
Mm-hmm.
Thirdly, why don't we fail frequently? So many times I felt like, oh, I'm going to fail once in my life. It better be a doozy. Or that's the last time I'm going to fail. And we make these decisions as if a leader only fails once and then he grows up. She is
Right.
now wise and she failed and it will never happen again. Well, it's not worked like that for me. If it has for you listening and watching today, kudos.
Good
So
on
I
you.
think we need to realize along the path of leadership, failure is going to happen, but it's going to happen frequently if we're trying big enough things. And then the final thing, this comes straight from John, is fail forward. Never fall backward, never fail and retreat, but fail always with anticipation that there's something big around the corner. So yeah, to answer your question, I wish my 52-year young self, yes, I said young, could tell my 22-year-old self, because I thought I knew everything as a 22-year-old, that, hey, it's okay, you're going to fail, just get a return on it. I think life would have been a lot better.
I agree. And where do we get that from? I don't know if we just perceived it. And I don't know if there are so many of you who are driving to work or going to an appointment right now or just listening in the privacy of your home and you're listening to this. But I know when John said, he had his audience that he was speaking to at the time say it to each other. But I want you to say it to yourself in the car or wherever you're listening right now. And I want you to take a moment just right now and say it out loud. I'm going to make mistakes. Just do me a favor and say that right now.
I'm going to make mistakes.
I'm going to make mistakes.
Oh.
And I think there are so many people, I know that it's been me, and I've been a leader long enough of others, and I know you have as well, Mark, long enough to know that there are some people who are really frozen, fearful of making a mistake for some reason, either of what that meant when they were a kid in their home, either because something that happened to them in school or in a job or somewhere where where maybe even wasn't how they felt, is maybe their job or their parent or their teacher or a coach. Someone made them feel foolish or dumb or terrible or a failure even because they failed. And so because of that time, because of the mistake that they made, and it might have even been a doozy, my friend. You might be listening today and you made a doozy of a mistake. And for some reason, you can't get past that to make future mistakes. Like, oh, Mark and Tracy and John, you don't know the mistake I made. You don't know this mistake. And there is no clarifying mistake that's like, well, if you make this mistake, you can't move forward. No, the four rules Mark just kind of gave us, the four kind of failing forward steps: fail first, fail fast, fail frequently, fail forward, that Mark just gave us. That's for anyone, no matter what kind of doozies you've made in the past. We can always fail forward. But Mark, was there a time in your life, because I think all of us in our past could go back to a place in our life where we had a failure that either embarrassed us, shamed us, made us feel really bad or dumb. Was there a time in your life where it clicked for you? Where was it a mistake that you made that you realized, wow, the fear of that mistake was far worse than the actual consequence of that mistake that helped you move forward? Or was it just kind of a maturing process of several mistakes that you realized you kind of talked yourself through it?
Yeah, I love this question, Tracy, because there are several mistakes that took the sting out of failure. It really is. I think of one. I tell the story. I think I've told it on this podcast. I'm sure that I have, of before I started working with John, because of some colossal series of failures and mistakes. I found myself counting potato chips. My poverty line was a bag of potato chips. If I could afford a bag of potato chips, I could count them out and make those potato chips last an entire week if I did my math right and if I kept my appetite in check. And that was truly, I started with John Maxwell's organization, truly counting out potato chips to make bags of potato chips last a week. I had nothing, literally nothing. Bankrupt, no money. I wasn't bankrupt. I paid all my bills and all that. I didn't have to declare myself bankrupt, but I truly was bankrupt, relationally, financially, emotionally. And I've come to realize that money and having money in the account is nice, but it is not essential. In other words, I take risks now financially. Just recently, in the last couple of years, we've bet everything in a belief that we can make our future bigger, better, brighter. And I'll be honest with you, I signed these documents, I mortgaged house, I did all this stuff, and I didn't even think about it. I'm like,
wow,
I've lost everything before. There's a rebound in me. And so I never want to lose that and allow acquired possessions to stop me from risking those for the future and the betterment of others around me. And so that would be one example. When you go through that, and I was there because of some mistakes. I did not have to go the destitute route. I made mistakes to get there. But one of my takeaways from that is monetary possessions and financial gain is nothing but a tool to do greater impact. It is not a controlling mechanism to stop me from risking greater impact in the future.
I think it's critical to point out here, crucial to point out here to our listeners. I think they can hear you say that and think, maybe they're assuming. I'm going to make an assumption here. You might be listening and think, oh, Mark Cole can do that. He has the means to make those big steps and mortgage his house or buy all in and not think about it because there's a big safety net underneath there. But what you're saying is you have actually taken away the safety net when you do those things. You aren't leaving a little safety net. You are going all in on something. And these are big deals and big all-ins. And you don't just wake up one day and you get to go big all in. It starts in the potato chip counting days when you don't have a whole lot and you go all in when there isn't a whole lot to lose, but you're kind of saving your face, saving skin, saving your reputation and what your parents might think or your family might think or your reputation. And those little steps that you took back then when you didn't have a lot to lose, but food for the week, built your security, your confidence to where you can get to that place today. So I think there are probably listeners who might downplay those risks that you take to go all in. And I don't think we can do that fairly without understanding that it's been a whole process to get you there. So I'm thinking now, let's say we have people who, let's flip it a little bit. Maybe they're leading people who are frozen with the fear of making mistakes. And if they don't know their people well enough, which it's really important that we know the people that we lead, they might not understand what is holding them back, those fears that are maybe rooted in childhood and rooted in something in young adulthood that have them, gripped with fear from making a mistake in their professional life. So can you talk a little bit to leaders who are leading people who, or maybe a whole group of people in their organization who are gripped with fear and who aren't taking necessary steps or risks in their professional lives that are necessary in order for the team to move forward? How does a leader move the team forward if they're gripped with fear of mistakes?
I think that you really got to grasp what John's saying in point number 2. Don't make the biggest mistake of all, which is doing nothing. I love what you said. There is no safety net when you're going all in. That defies the whole concept of being all in, pot committed,
right.
Over it. There's no safety net. I'm out if this
Right.
doesn't work. Somebody else has to come and step in because I couldn't make it work. And I think that we've got to get that mindset because oftentimes we risk what we can manage rather than risk what we can't manage. And when we risk what we can't manage, that's all in, and that's making a decision. I'm not going to sit here and do nothing. And that I think that's the biggest thing, Tracy, to capture in this lesson is what is it? John, in the middle of this lesson that he's talking right now, he said he was asked the question a long time ago, what would you try if you knew failure wasn't an option? What a great question. Remember that? You've been asked that question. It's one of those questions. What's the 2 greatest days of a person's life? It's one of those rhetorical questions we've heard over and over again. What would you risk if you knew failure wasn't an option? Or what would you try? John said, I've got a better question for us. What would you risk if you knew failure was going to happen, but you would learn from it? Oh. So there's something so big that I can go in and calculate. I'm probably not going to make it, but it's going to be okay. That's the mindset that we're after because I believe back to this quote I used at the very beginning, failure is not the opposite of success, it's part of success. Ariana, that is exactly right. Ariana Huffington had it right. Success and failure are not opposite, they are codependent. For you to really be successful in your life is going to mean how big you are in your failures. John said it. What was it? Point number 7 says, remember that the size of the person, not the size of her mistakes, determines success or failure. Failure is not failure if you become better in the middle of it. Or failure is not final if you become better in the middle of the experience. That one thing, if I could release all of you from feeling like failure is final and failure is defining of who you are, I believe those are the 2 greatest sources of fear that stops people from trying something so big that failure is probable.
I agree. Well, I will let you close this out, but I just wanted to give one more encouragement to our friends, whether you're watching or listening. You might be having your mind blown a little bit and a little bit of fear is creeping in. Like, dare I believe this? Dare I trust John enough to take me to this next place? And I just want to encourage you, his last point was allow your mistakes to take you to the next level. Let your attitude about your mistakes, forgive yourself, leave it in the past. It's in the past. Leave it there. Don't carry it into your future, friends. And let this be something that really, your attitude, let it determine the altitude of where you go, friends. We're for you.
So many of you, thanks, Tracy. So many of you are listening to this and going, wow, when's John's book on return on failure coming out? I need that. And guess what? You're going to have to wait. But I know out of literally thousands of new listeners and viewers every single week, I know that there's new people out there to John's world, and there's a book that he's written on this that I believe will really help you. One is, it's right behind Tracy right there. She's got it all set up for us. But it's also this book I'm holding in my hand, Sometimes You Win and Sometimes You Learn. And really, it helps with the attitude, the perspective with which we deal with failure. I've asked our team if you would give them a discount, if the team would give you a discount as the podcast family, and they have. And so in the show notes, we're going to include a link to be able to order this book, Sometimes You Win, Sometimes You Learn. We're going to give you a 15% discount when you use the keyword podcast. So make sure that you put that in there for the discount that you will receive. I will tell you, I would recommend you buy a half a dozen, and resource your team with a perspective, especially those of you that are trying audacious, BHAG things in 2022. Get your team to understand failure is not final, and that's the way to do that. There's 2 other episodes that I want to encourage you to listen to and point you toward that will help you with the same subject matter. One is Redefining Failure. It's a podcast we did not too long ago. And then the other is Failure is Not Final. Both of those podcast links can be found in the show note. And really, here's what we're trying to explain to you today. Our standout statement is this: fail forward. Make something happen that is so big that when it doesn't work out exactly how you want it to, you're big enough to stand that test. Hey, we have always, over the last few weeks, we've been highlighting listener comments or listener questions, and today is no exception. Your feedback, your passing the podcast along to others is the fuel that gets Tracy and I up on days like today, excited to come in here because we see and sense and smell and taste and can actually experience impact that's happening. I do want to just camp out for a minute on chasing failure.
Sure.
Talk to me about your journey and how that brought you to become a scholar of failure. I don't know if that's a compliment or not, man. You're a scholar
Right.
on failure.
Right.
But let's talk
Right.
a little bit about what led to your great insight on failure.
Yeah. I grew up believing that failure is not an option until I started meeting successful people and realized, well, they've all failed. So apparently it's an option. And my wife and I, we got to go on a couple of different TV shows because she told a friend that she thought it would be cool to get engaged and married on the same day. I had no idea what that meant. So I guessed and began planning a wedding behind her